Picture this. You're 18 years old, standing in some desert you can't pronounce, holding a rifle that costs more than your dad makes in 6 months. They told you you're here for freedom. They told you it's about democracy, national security, stopping the bad guys. But what if I told you the real reason you're standing there has nothing to do with any of that? What if the real reason is a spreadsheet in a boardroom 4,000 miles away that shows profits dropping 3%? Listen, war isn't about good versus evil. It never has been. Throughout history, war has been business, aggressive business, the most violent form of negotiation. It's a lawsuit filed with missiles instead of lawyers. There's a quote from a guy named Smedley Butler. He was a Marine Corps general, most decorated Marine in US history at the time. And in the 1930s, he said something that got him in a lot of trouble. He said, "War is a racket, like organized crime, like a scam." And today, we're not looking at the propaganda. We're not looking at the flags and the speeches and the heroic music. We're looking at the money, the ledgers, the balance sheets. Because when you follow the money, war starts making a lot more sense. And it's a lot more disgusting than you thought. From drug cartels run by empires to fruit companies that literally owned countries, we're about to break down the real economic reasons nations go to war. And I'm warning you right now, this is going to make you uncomfortable. Let's get into it. Let's start with maybe the most insane, cynical war in human history. The Opium Wars. If you think modern corporations are ruthless, wait till you hear about the British East India Company. Here's the setup. It's the 1800s. Britain is obsessed with tea. Not like, oh, I enjoy tea. I'm talking addicted. The entire country runs on tea. And there's only one place to get it. China. Here's the problem. China doesn't want anything Britain is selling. They don't want British wool. Too itchy. They don't want British manufactured goods. China's emperor literally told the British king, "We have everything we need. Your stuff is trash." So Britain is buying tons of tea with silver. And their silver is draining out of the country fast. This is a massive economic crisis. Britain is bleeding money. The trade deficit is killing them. They need something the Chinese will buy. Something they'll buy over and over again. Something addictive. So Britain decided to become the world's biggest drug dealer. They started growing opium in India, processing it, smuggling it into China by the ton. Now, obviously, this was illegal in China, because opium destroys lives, ruins families, collapses societies. But economically, it was perfect. By the late 1830s, the silver was flowing back to Britain. There were 12 million opium addicts in China. The plan worked. But then China tried to enforce its own laws. In 1839, a Chinese official showed up and wasn't playing games. He arrested dealers, seized pipes, and then he took 20,000 chests of British opium, worth millions, mixed it with lime and salt, and dumped it in the ocean. Now, if you're a normal person, you see a government destroying illegal drugs, law enforcement doing its job. But if you're Britain in 1839, you see asset destruction, you see lost profits, you see your shareholders getting angry. So Britain didn't say, "Oops, our bad for being drug dealers." No, they said China was violating free trade principles. They sent the Navy. They went to war to force China to keep buying drugs so Britain could balance its budget. The technology gap was brutal. British steam-powered warships destroyed Chinese wooden boats. It was a massacre. The result? The Treaty of Nanking in 1842. Here's what China had to do. 1. Pay Britain 21 million silver dollars as reparations. Imagine the D raids a cartel, and then the government has to pay the cartel for the drugs they seized. That's what happened. 2. Open 5 ports to British trade. 3. Give Hong Kong to Britain permanently. The takeaway here is simple. Britain literally bombed China into drug addiction to save the British economy. It wasn't about hate. It wasn't about ideology. It was about the balance of payments. It was about money. Yo, real quick. If this is blowing your mind, if you're realizing everything you learned in history class was propaganda, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Channel name is Disciplined Ego. We break down the real history, the financial reality. The stuff they don't teach you in school because it makes the system look bad. New videos every week. Turn on notifications. Alright, let's keep going, because it gets worse. If the Opium Wars were about a government acting like a business, the Banana Wars were about businesses acting like governments. Let's jump to the early 1900s. America is rising, and a new fruit is getting popular in grocery stores. Bananas. Now bananas are a logistical nightmare. They rot fast. To make money on bananas, you need to control everything. The farms, the railroads, the ports, the ships. Enter the United Fruit Company, now called Chiquita. These guys weren't just a farming company. In countries like Honduras and Guatemala, they were the economy. They controlled the railroads. If you wanted to travel, you paid United Fruit. If you wanted to export anything, you used their trains. They paid zero taxes. They owned 70% of the land. This created the term Banana Republic. It's not just a clothing store. It's a country where a foreign company controls everything and the government is just a puppet. But here's where it gets dark. What happens when the people of those countries want better wages, want land reform, want to stop a foreign company from owning their entire country? They elect leaders who promise to fix it. And that threatens profits. Let's talk about Guatemala in 1954. A guy named Jacobo Arbenz gets elected president. He's a reformer. He looks at his country and sees that United Fruit owns 42% of the land, but they only using a tiny fraction of it. They're holding the rest just to keep competitors out, while people are starving. So Arbenz passes a law. The government will buy the unused land and give it to poor farmers. And here's the genius part. He offers to pay United Fruit exactly what they declared the land was worth on their tax returns. The problem? United Fruit had massively undervalued the land on paper to avoid taxes. Now the government was going to pay them that fake low price. United Fruit was furious. But they didn't hire mercenaries to overthrow the government. They had a better option. They called the U.S. government. The Secretary of State was John Foster Dulles. His brother Allen Dulles ran the CIA, and both of them used to work for United Fruit's law firm. United Fruit launched a massive PR campaign. They painted Arbenz as a communist, a puppet of the Soviet Union, a threat to America. They hired Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda, to convince Americans that bananas were the front line of the Cold War. In 1954, the CIA launched Operation PB Success. They armed rebels. They flew bombing runs over the capital. They jammed radio stations and broadcast fake news about an invasion. Arbenz resigned. The military dictatorship that replaced him gave the land back to United Fruit. And Guatemala got thrown into a civil war that lasted 36 years and killed 200,000 people. Why? Because a fruit company's stock price was threatened. The Marines became private security for shareholders. And before you think this is ancient history, ask yourself, how different is this from the cobalt mines in Congo today? The lithium mines in South America? The players change. The game stays the same. Let's jump to 1990. The Gulf War. Everyone knows this war was about oil. But nobody explains how it was about oil. Let me explain. You're Saddam Hussein. You're the leader of Iraq. You just finished an 8-year war with Iran. It was brutal. Hundreds of thousands dead. But economically, it was a disaster. You're drowning in $80 billion of debt. You owe a lot of that money to your neighbors. Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. They loaned you cash to fight Iran. Now your only source of income is oil. And you need the price of oil to be high. Around $25 a barrel. That's how you pay off the debt. But Kuwait is overproducing. They're pumping way more oil than they're supposed to. This floods the market and drives the price down to $10 a barrel. Every time oil drops $1, Iraq loses $1 billion a year. Kuwait is bankrupting you, so you ask them to stop. They refuse. You ask them to forgive the war debt. They refuse. So on August 2nd, 1990, Saddam invades Kuwait. This wasn't about territory. This was a hostile takeover of a competitor. By seizing Kuwait, Saddam would control 20% of the world's oil. He could cut production, spike the price, and solve his debt crisis overnight. Now let's talk about America's response. The US didn't intervene because invading countries is mean. If that were true, we'd be at war in a dozen places right now. The US intervened because of something called the Carter Doctrine. It basically says if anyone tries to control the Persian Gulf oil supply, we will use military force to stop them. Why? Because the global economy runs on oil. If one guy controls the thermostat, he can strangle everyone. That's an unacceptable risk. The first Gulf War wasn't about stealing Iraq's oil. It was about market stability. It was about preventing a monopoly. The coalition bombed Iraq back to the Stone Age to make sure oil kept flowing at stable prices. The lesson? Wars aren't fought to steal resources. They're fought to guarantee the flow of resources. A blockage in the supply chain is a hard attack for the economy. Nations will kill to keep the blood pumping. Let's shift from oil to water. Most people think the 1967 Six-Day War was about religion and territory. And yeah, those were factors. But look at the government documents from 1964 to 66. There's a different panic. Water. Here's the situation. You're Israel in 1964. Your country is a desert. You're rebuilding a massive project to pump water from the Sea of Galilee down to the Negev desert to grow food. Without this water, your economy collapses. You can't feed your people. But the water in the Sea of Galilee comes from the Jordan River. And the Jordan River starts in Syria and Lebanon. In 1964, the Arab League comes up with a plan. They're going to divert those rivers before they reach Israel. This would cut Israel's water supply by 35%. Israel declared this would be an act of war, and they didn't wait for tanks to cross the border. In 1965 and 66, Israeli forces targeted Syrian construction equipment working on the diversion. These were battles over water. When the full war broke out in 1967, look at what Israel captured. The Golan Heights controls the water sources. The West Bank sits on top of a massive underground aquifer. By the end of the war, Israel had secured its water supply. And right now, we're seeing the same thing brewing on the Nile River. Ethiopia is building a dam. Egypt is panicking because they rely on the Nile for 97% of their water. If there's a major war in North Africa in the next 10 years, it won't be about religion. It'll be about that dam. All right, we've talked about drugs, fruit, oil, and water. But what if war itself is the product? In 1961, President Eisenhower gave a farewell speech. He was a 5-star general, not some pacifist hippie. And he warned America about the military-industrial complex. Here's how it works. The government collects taxes. They buy weapons from private contractors. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing. Those contractors hire lobbyists to push for aggressive foreign policy. Aggressive foreign policy creates conflict. Conflict requires more weapons. Repeat forever. Let's look at the numbers. If you invested $10,000 in defense stocks when the Afghanistan war started in 2001, that investment would be worth almost $100,000 by the time we pulled out in 2021. War is insanely profitable for these companies. But it goes deeper. Imagine you're a congressman. The army says they don't need more tanks. They have thousands sitting in the desert unused. But the tank factory is in your district. It employs 5,000 people. If the factory closes, those people lose jobs. Your district's economy crashes. You lose re-election. So what do? You vote to build more tanks the army doesn't want, to fight wars that haven't started yet. The economy becomes addicted to preparing for war. Real example, the F-35 fighter jet. Most expensive weapon system in history. Over $1.7 trillion. But here's the genius part. The parts are manufactured in 45 different states. To cancel the program, you'd have to fight senators from 45 states protecting jobs. It's politically unkillable. The economics of domestic employment override military necessity. We're not building weapons because we need them. We're building them because people need jobs. Finally, let's talk about the future. If you're watching this on your phone, you're using the single most valuable resource in human history. Semiconductors. Microchips. And here's the scary part. One company on one island controls 90% of the world's most advanced chips. That company is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. That island is Taiwan. This creates something called the Silicon Shield. Taiwan is so economically vital that the West must defend it. Not out of charity, out of necessity. If Taiwan falls or TSMC gets destroyed, the global economy stops. Not recession, depression, worse than 1929. Now imagine you're China. You want Taiwan for political reasons. But you also need those chips. If you invade and destroy the factories, your own economy collapses. Now imagine you're America. You need those chips for everything. Your military, your economy, everything. You can't let China control that supply. This has created a standoff. Mutual assured economic destruction. In fact, the US has hinted that if China invades, they might blow up TSMC factories rather than let them fall into Chinese hands. Think about that. We might destroy the most advanced factories on Earth just to make sure the enemy doesn't get them. This is why the US passed the CHIPS Act in 2022. $52 billion to build chip factories in America. They're trying to diversify before the crash. The chip war is the Opium War 2.0. But instead of tea and drugs, we're fighting over sand and silicon. So what did we learn? We tell ourselves stories about war. We build monuments. We write songs. We talk about honor and freedom and defending democracy. And for the soldiers on the ground, those things are real. Their sacrifice is genuine. But for the people who start wars, the policymakers, the executives, the shareholders, the calculation is colder. Britain didn't hate China. They loved trade surpluses. United Fruit didn't care about communism. They cared about land value. Saddam didn't want Kuwait's sand. He wanted their market share. The future wars won't be about ideology. They'll be about water and microchips. A Marine general named Smedley Butler was right almost 100 years ago. War is a racket. It's business by other means. It's when the cost of killing becomes cheaper than the cost of losing market share. Next time you see breaking news about a conflict brewing somewhere, don't just look at the flags. Look at the imports. Look at the exports. Follow the money. Because ideologies change, borders move, but economics? Economics stays undefeated. And yo, before you go, make sure you check out the next video on the screen. We're diving into another big secret. Click it, watch it, learn from it. I'll see you there.